Good morning. It is now 8:26. I'm Lynette Adams. We are following breaking news this morning. The sheriff's office is investigating a major crash on 490 West between exit 3 and exit 4, which is Chi-Lai Center. Here's a live look at the scene right now. You can see multiple emergency crews on scene. Just a moment ago, we saw some traffic being diverted from the area. We've learned this was a tour bus with more than 24 people on the bus. The bus flipped over. This happened just about an hour ago, and there are multiple injuries. I-490 is closed in both directions in that area, so you will have to take an alternate route if you normally travel through that area. Again, a major crash on Interstate 490 West near exits 3 and 4. You're asked to avoid that area if possible. Rich Kennelia will have your forecast after the break. Good morning. I'm Lynette Adams. We are following breaking news. A tour bus has crashed, injuring multiple people. This happened around 7:20 this morning on 490 West between exits 3 and 4, which is Chi-Lai Center. Now, here's a live look at the scene right now. You can see multiple emergency crews there. We've learned this was a tour bus with more than 24 people on board. The crash flipped the bus on its side, and there are multiple injuries. I-490 is closed in both directions in that area, so you will have to take an alternate route. This is a developing story. We'll bring you the latest on WHBC.com and News 10 NBC at noon. Rich Kennelia will be back with your forecast after the break. And we begin with breaking news. More than 24 people rushed to the hospital this morning after a tour bus heading west on 490 flips onto its side. I'm Lynette Adams. It happened around 7 o'clock this morning, right between exits 3 and 4 on 490 West. That's just west of Union Street in Chi-Lai. The bus carrying 28 people, all of them had to be treated or evaluated at the hospital. One person underwent emergency surgery and is now in critical condition. News 10 NBC investigative reporter Jennifer Lukey has been at the scene since early this morning. She joins us live with the very latest. Jen, how did this happen?
Well, Lynette, that is still under investigation, but what I can tell you right now is it looks like there was no other car involved, that the bus went off the road, tipped over, and spun around into the opposite direction. I want to get right to the video of this scene because we're still being kept pretty far back, so where we are live now, you can't see it super great. But we have been able to get video. We know that the bus left New York City around midnight, with its final destination being Niagara Falls. It made stops along the thruway to pick up and drop off passengers. Right around 7 a.m., it went off the road here along 490, tipping over, spinning around. The 28 people, as you mentioned, including the driver, were on board at the time. Most of them were able to get themselves out of the bus, but 2 had to be extricated. It took 18 ambulances to transfer all of the passengers to 4 different hospitals across our region. 1 passenger is in critical condition. The rest have various degrees of injury, but most of them, I'm told, are minor. More than 100 first responders were here on the scene this morning. The sheriff was one of them, and he explained what he came upon.
The fact that there were people out walking along 490, and of course you got a bus turned over on the side, you got people possibly trapped, we don't know who's on the bus yet. It was that surreal moment. You know, you train for these things, but when you pull up and actually see a bus flipped on its side and people literally walking in a state of confusion on the side of the road trying to figure out what just happened to them as they were just thrown about inside a bus, right? So it was surreal.
We executed what we've practiced many times, is to get the patients that are critical off the scene first and then work on the rest. There was a great triage that happened to determine who needed to go first, who was very sick, who was still on the bus. And then, as the chief said, there were people walking around the scene that we kind of corralled them into one area to kind of assess them, triage them, and get them transported in a timely fashion.
So again, back out here live at the scene, we do not know at this point what may have triggered this accident. We do not believe, according to investigators, that any other cars or semis were involved. The driver is being cooperative, according to investigators. They do not believe at this point that he was under the influence of any drugs or alcohol. He's being checked out at the hospital, but is expected to be okay. So we're really at the beginning stages of this investigation. But Lynette, I want to mention that the sheriff mentioned to me that a number of people who were driving by in their personal cars or in semi trucks who saw the bus go off actually stopped, got out, and tried to help kind of get people off the roadway. They called 911. He said those people may have helped save lives.
We continue to follow breaking news. More than 24 people injured today after a bus overturned on 490 in Chilai. Look at that. Good Samaritans driving by pulled over to help.
They definitely helped save lives from the standpoint that you had confused people in a state of shock wandering around on 490.
The bus overturned and spun across 490 this morning. Right now, investigators are still trying to figure out what caused the driver to lose control. Here's what we know at this hour. The Flix bus left New York City around midnight, headed to Niagara Falls. It made several stops along the thruway to pick and drop off passengers. And then around 7 this morning, it went off the road on 490 West in the town of Chilai. We have team coverage with Berkeley Breen live at Strong Memorial Hospital, where more than a dozen passengers were treated. But we begin with Jennifer Lukey live in Chilai, where the westbound lanes are now back open. And Jen, you got there shortly after the crash. I can't even imagine what that response was like.
Yeah, Nikki, it was absolutely massive. I live in the town of Chilai, not far from here, actually, and for about 30 minutes straight, all you could hear around this town were sirens. Crews just racing here to the scene to assist. Now, 490 westbound was shut down for almost all of the day. It just reopened about 30 minutes ago because investigators were trying to piece together how this happened. The initial 911 calls came in right around 7 a.m.
At least 6 on the ground, a bunch of walking wounded. I would say we probably need at least 10 ambulances and maybe some sort of heavy wrecker.
Turns out even more resources were necessary. All 28 people on board, including a child, were transported to area hospitals.
We ended up using 18 ambulances, which for this area is incredible. It's an incredible response.
First responders from across the area worked together to triage the passengers, many of whom were able to get themselves out of the bus, but were walking around disoriented on the side of the highway.
The fact that there were people out walking along 490, and of course you got a bus turned over on the side, you got people possibly trapped, we don't know who's on the bus yet. It was that surreal moment, you know, you train for these things, but when you pull up and actually see a bus flipped on its side and people literally walking in a state of confusion on the side of the road trying to figure out what just happened to them as they were just thrown about inside a bus, right? So it was surreal.
At the moment, the driver is cooperating with the investigation. The sheriff's department says there are no signs he was impaired by drugs or alcohol, and it does not appear any other vehicles were involved or triggered the accident.
We're going to take the bus back to a secure impound where that will continue with the investigation. It'll go through a complete and thorough mechanical inspection to make sure that it's up to standard and all of the safety requirements, everything, to make sure that the driver was performing all of their tasks as needed according to New York State DOT regulations. So this will be a lengthy investigation.
And within the last few minutes, we have learned that the driver of the bus was ejected out the front window, but he is okay and was actually on scene trying to render first aid to some of his passengers when first responders got here. But within the last hour or so, he has been ticketed for 4 different offenses: fatigued driving, unsafe lane change, unreasonable speed, and failing to wear his seatbelt. The sheriff's department says he is still cooperating with them and their investigation is ongoing. They have, Nikki, towed the bus off of 490 back to a secured impound lot where it is being reviewed and inspected with a fine-tooth comb, and all of the inspection records and the safety records of the company who owns that bus, that's all under investigation still as well.
You hear so many times about the dangers of fatigued driving, and this appears to be an example. Jen, thank you. I know you've been out there all day covering this. We'll check back in with you later. 16 passengers, including the one critically hurt, went to Strong Hospital. News 10 NBC's chief investigative reporter Berkeley Breen is live at the hospital. He continues our team coverage this afternoon. Now, Burke, you just spoke with the doctor who treated them. How's everybody doing?
Well, we still have that one person in the operating room, Nikki. That is the one passenger who was critically injured. There are other people here as well. You're going to hear the head of the emergency department say they're dealing with significant injuries, but they're also dealing with passengers that were hurt so slightly they might get out of the hospital soon. We did learn at this news conference that the passengers are from around the world. 12 of them were trapped inside the bus after it rolled over and slid 600 feet along 490. The other passengers, as you heard the sheriff say, were wandering around the crash site. The county has secured a hotel for the passengers who are out of the hospital and any of their family members who come here to try to get them. There are 14 people at that hospital right now. The head of the ER at Strong says they're dealing with head injuries, body injuries, and injuries to arms and legs.
One of the patients is very critical and has been in the operating room. There are a couple other patients with significant injuries, other patients with moderate injuries, and then a number of patients that will be discharged from the hospital.
Visit Rochester stepped up.
11 passengers went to RGH, 4 went to Unity Hospital in Greece. Rochester Regional, which runs those two hospitals, told us in a news release recently that they're already starting to release some of those patients. I asked the county executive where this hotel was, and he told me he was asked not to reveal its location. We're live at Strong Hospital, Berkeley Breen, News 10, NBC.
Now, we heard about the driver, but what about the passengers? Were they wearing their seatbelts?
The answer from the sheriff's office was no, they were not. We don't know if there were seatbelts on the bus. If they were not wearing them.
Wow. All right. Berkeley Breen live there at Strong Hospital. Thank you, Burke. Again, 28 people hurt in this morning's bus crash on 490 in Chili. They were on a Flix bus operated by Tribal Sun Bus Company out of Massachusetts. That bus driver has been ticketed for driving fatigued, speeding, unsafe lane change, and failing to wear a seatbelt. Watch our continued coverage coming up in the next half hour.
Investigators are still trying to figure out what caused the driver to lose control in a crash today involving a bus. Here's what we know right now. The Flix bus left New York City around midnight, headed to Niagara Falls. It made several stops along the thruway to pick up and drop off passengers. And then around 7 this morning, it went off the road in this area of 490 West in the town of Chili.
That's right, and we have team coverage with Berkeley Breen live at Strong Memorial Hospital, where more than a dozen passengers were treated. But we begin with Jennifer Lukey live in Chili, where the westbound lanes are now back open. And Jen, you got there right after the crash. What was the response like?
It was just massive, Deanna and Brett. I live not far from here. The sirens were going off for 30 minutes plus, and that was all the crews coming here to the scene. Now, what we can tell you is in the last couple of hours, the driver of the bus has been issued 4 traffic tickets for fatigued driving, unsafe lane change, failure to wear seatbelts, and unreasonable speed. Investigators believe he was going at least 70 miles per hour when the bus went off the road, flipped onto its side, and skidded at least 200 yards down 490.
We have a report of a tour bus that flipped. Report of people ejected.
The first calls came in around 7 a.m. and very quickly first responders knew they had a major incident on their hands.
Bus drivers reporting 28 people on board. I would say everybody's injured.
The sheriff and many of his deputies were some of the first people on scene.
By the time I got here, there were still patients on the ground. There were still patients being treated by EMTs. They were still being prioritized in triage. Everybody's in life-saving mode initially. That's the first thing you think about is how many lives can we save.
All 28 people on board, including one child, were transported to area hospitals.
We ended up using 18 ambulances, which for this area is incredible. It's an incredible response.
And those rigs came from across the area. They had to shut down the opposite side of 490 to allow for them to get to the scene through the traffic.
Strong being the trauma center for the region, obviously is going to get the sick patients, and then we can start to spread out some of the what we call walking wounded or minor injuries at that point, which we were successfully able to do to not overwhelm one hospital.
At the moment, the driver of the bus is cooperating with the investigation. The sheriff's department says there are no signs he was impaired by drugs or alcohol, and it does not appear any other vehicles were involved or triggered the crash. But there were people who saw it happen in front of them and pulled over to help.
They were first responders also. There were multiple semi-truck drivers that were out of their truck. God forbid, they weren't part of the accident, and we thank God for that because it could have been much worse, but they were right behind the bus. But they were first responders too. I mean, everybody stepped in and did what they're supposed to do as a citizen and then help our EMTs, our firefighters, and our cops as they try and do their task.
Tasks that still continue as the sheriff's office tries to figure out why the bus went off the road, tipped onto its side and spun around.
We're doing accident reconstruction right now. We're doing all the measurements with drones and using all our technology. We're gathering as much video from DOT cameras and onboard cameras that may be on the bus and cell phone cameras from all the patients.
And within the last couple of hours, the bus was righted and towed out of here. It's going to an impound lot secured where the deputies are continuing their investigation. There is a full inspection of the bus happening right now. They're also going through inspection records, safety records of the company that operated the bus. So obviously this is still a very active and ongoing investigation. Brett and Deanna.
Thanks so much. And we got an update on the passenger who was most seriously hurt.
Chief Investigative Reporter Berkeley Breen spoke to the head of emergency medicine at Strong. Burke joins us now. Burke, how is that person doing?
Well, as of mid-afternoon, Brett, the hospital said he was still in surgery. He was one of 16 passengers to come here to Strong Hospital, some of them with significant injuries. Some might get out of the hospital this evening, and when they do, they're going to go to a hotel, which was secured by the county, and by Visit Rochester, which is the tourism agency for the region.
Visit Rochester stepped up, identified and secured a hotel that we've been working with individuals from this morning to house until they can be essentially so they can get a plan to get home. So there are 14 individuals that are currently placed at that hotel, and our Office of Emergency Management is assisting those individuals in their efforts to contact their families and help bring them together.
Now think about what these passengers went through. When the bus went off the road and then flipped over, it slid 200 yards down the highway. Those who could get out did so through the emergency hatch on the roof of the bus. 12 people were still trapped inside and they were rescued. When the mass casualty was called by the sheriff's office, it triggered Strong Hospital's mass casualty response, which included a medical team for every patient that arrived. And I asked the head of emergency medicine here what kind of injuries they treated.
A variety of injuries, head injuries, extremity injuries, some injuries to the torso as well. As you can imagine, in a crash, what we call blunt trauma, the injuries can be extensive.
I asked Dr. Kamali where were these folks going and why were they going to Niagara Falls? He and the sheriff's office couldn't answer that question for me. What Dr. Kamali said is they were focused on just trying to make them feel better. We're live at Strong Hospital, Berkeley Breen, News 10, NBC.
So, Burke, that bus made multiple stops along the way after it left New York City. Did it actually stop in Rochester?
It did. That's why it was on 490. If it was just heading to Niagara Falls, it would have stayed on the thruway. So we know that people got off when the bus stopped in Rochester. We don't know if anybody got on, but we do know people got off. And you got to think tonight, how fortunate do those folks feel tonight?
No doubt about it. All right, Burke, thank you.